What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself are joined by our good friend, Mr. Jordan Lips. And I'm going to have Jordan introduce himself, and then we're going to get into some updates before talking about all things hypertrophy with Mr. Jordan.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me, first of all. I am an online coach. I think the three of us do like a fairly similar thing, but maybe with a little bit of some differences. I'm an M&U certified nutritionist and certified through N1 as an online coach, but also some other certifications over the decade that we've been in this game. Do mostly, actually exclusively online coaching at this point, and recently also began a group coaching program. If you guys obviously listen to this podcast, you guys know about Paragon and Evolved Training. It's something similar, basically just trying to steal most of those people over to my group over the next couple of years. And so similar to that with some small differences for sure. So thanks for having me, guys.
Of course. So, Bryan, do you want to kick us off with our 7-day updates?
Yeah, for sure. So just real quick, not to take the whole episode over, but I did not end up having my mouth procedure that I talked about on the last episode. I went in for the thing, and the thing on my mouth was dormant. So they couldn't operate on something they can't see. So they basically sent me on my way and were like, when the thing comes back, we'll schedule an appointment, which, to my dismay was like, well, shit, I planned my deload week around this, and like my whole life was going to work perfectly in line with this 4-day period of time off. And now I have some random period of time that I'm going to have to go and do that. So that is what it is. I started my metabolic training this week. We're going to talk a lot more about that probably in the next episode, not waste a ton of time here. And then, just quickly on the HRV thing that we touched on last episode, I've had some cool responses from people, and the most obvious response from Shantae basically being like, the reason your HRV is low on these random ones that it takes throughout the day is probably because your heart rate is higher. Specifically, I'm walking around, I'm working out, I'm moving around the house, whatever it is. And heart rate variability measures the time between your heartbeats. So of course, if I'm sitting there under a cathartic state at 42 beats per minute, my HRV is going to come across a lot higher than it would if I'm in the middle of a workout and I'm at like 138 beats per minute, just dying between sets of my metabolite cycle. So that was cool to hear. And then for anyone that saw my story as well, which will have been, I guess, a week earlier when this episode comes out, but I've been focused on VO2 max now too. This is something else I'm intrigued by. And the discrepancy, or kind of what correlates more to improve VO2 max, whether it has to do with just being a smaller version of you, like your body size is actually smaller and therefore you have less shit to work through to convert to usable oxygen, versus somebody who actually just trains cardio but still remains like a relatively large human. And so I've gotten a lot of cool inputs from that too over the course of the day. And I look forward to kind of talking about all that stuff over the course of the next couple episodes here.
Jordan, what about you?
Yeah, that stuff is super interesting, by the way. Actually, as we were like an hour ago, I was like listening to the beginning of that podcast, and so caught some of the HRV chat, which maybe we'll dive into later, but maybe not because you guys did that already. For me, not a whole lot. We just bought this fancy new standing desk that I'm using right now, just basically because I see that you guys are always podcasting standing up, and I thought, well, that'd be cool. So if you guys see me like floating down halfway through the podcast, it's because like I've probably never stood for, an hour and a half or 2 hours, however long this is going to go. And so not a whole lot. Things are good. We just kicked off a new mesocycle in the group program. So I know that a lot of the work that I do for that is front loaded in the mesocycle via like form videos and asking questions and kind of plugging up holes that I might not have seen initially when I laid out the plan. And so that's a really fun time. I'm watching like hundreds of form videos. And for me, that is like such a good indication of whether or not I've done a good job teaching this movement via a form video and via the cues that I'm giving in the form video. If I'm seeing like, we do a group Zoom every week. And so but at the end of a week of watching everybody do every movement across the whole week, the whole microcycle, I have like 10 things that like basically everybody's doing. And I know that, I have to look inward and say, they're doing this because I didn't explain this well enough. And so that's really helped me grow. It's like, yeah, I'm redoing form videos like every 6 weeks sometimes for certain things, but they're always getting better. And, if we do go into the group coaching discussion, it's definitely one of those things, being able to be a good teacher whilst not actually there yourself, that is both scalable from a business perspective, but also super helpful for the end user. And so we just kicked off. Today's day 2 of the mesocycle. We do an intro week, so it's really like day 9 of the mesocycle. But it's been super fun to see people, grow from meso to meso. And in this week and a half so far, like touching up a lot of the form videos and stuff that the program will have over the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about group coaching stuff here since we both run in one of these programs and Aaron, has been able to view from the outside. I think it'd make a really fun discussion on kind of some of the ways that we do things similarly and probably differently too.
Yeah, so for me, not much update. My back is feeling better, but I wouldn't say it's fine by any means. I've been kind of training gingerly around it, and now this week starting to just push a little bit more to see what might affect it or not. We'll see. Work in progress there. And then I guess the big life update is my Bali visa came in this morning. So I will officially be heading to Bali in the second week of May for about 6 months. Super, super excited about that. And it will obviously huge. Provide some interesting wrinkles with us, our podcast recording times. What?
No, totally. I actually didn't even think about that aspect, but I do have a question. Are you going to be in the same general area as the first time you were there?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and that's part of the reason why we're going back. Like, we already know where the gyms are, where the grocery store is. Like, we've already been there and learned, so it's an easier return. And we've been wanting to go back. I mean, we've been trying to go back to Bali since the pandemic started. So, yep. Cool. You guys want to jump in to the episode?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, I mean, we can talk about your Bali thing for a while.
I'm sure there'll be a million wrinkles as that unfolds. So for the listeners out there, once we get into the later parts of May and June, I'm sure there will be plenty of unforeseen circumstances that will be brought up on the podcast. So kind of just to start off, Jordan, can you just tell us a little bit more around yourself and what background kind of got you into where we find ourselves today?
Sure. I'm sure my story is not unlike many. I started out as a personal trainer. Actually, the original plan was to go to law school. But after undergrad, I took the LSATs and said to my family, who was fairly hell-bent on me doing that I'd love to take a year off. I just was, burnt out from school, but like realistically hesitant about that decision in and of itself. And went to go work at my like local boutique gym, which immediately upon like day 1 of doing, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. This being just something in this space where I had a little bit more of an entrepreneurial mindset, a little bit more control over my schedule. I got to work with people in a field that I really liked. And so it was all of 1 week before in my brain, I decided this is what I wanted to do. And to my family's dismay that they were, disappointed in that. But not that this is about proving family wrong, but they are all very happy that I've made that decision 10 years, looking back. And so did that for a while. The gym was actually a pretty interesting place. I was very fortunate. I think some people start in like big box gyms, which has pros and cons. But this was a boutique style gym, which only did one-on-one personal training. And it was a little weird. It was also like a weight loss factory where we were like straight up starving people to death, which was a dark, dark place for me because I didn't know very much. And so I did a lot of that stuff and a lot of like the pushing people to the nth degree and like quote yelling at people, forcing like a lot of like low EQ style of coaching people through like really low calorie diets. And so it was a dark place, but it did teach me some things, obviously looking back. After a while doing that, a friend of mine and I had become fairly successful in that space and thought, what's next for us is to open our own gym, because we assume that, as a personal trainer, the next step upward in the industry is to own a gym. And it took all about 3 days of doing that before I realized that was not a step up. That was like a lateral move, and went from being somebody who was working on the floor for 10 straight hours, had a bunch of clients that I was working on stuff with, to staying up late doing payroll and doing interviews for, front desk people and maintenance guys. And it turned into, listen, I'm not a manager. I think that was what it was. It just was like really missing that working together with people. And there was just one night of like doing payroll late where I was like, this blows, like I had unanswered texts from clients. I wanted to get back to doing some programming. I was taking a course at the time and I was like, this is not where my passion is. And so I believe it was maybe 2 months into the gym opening that I sold my half to my partner and decided that I was going to go. I had been doing a little bit of hybrid online coaching at the time just to kind of get my feet wet. Not to tangent too much on that, but I really found that, when I was working in person, I was limited to my geography, and just so happens that like, I wasn't although I had a full book of clients, they weren't necessarily a full book of people that were doing the sort of things that I was passionate about at the time, or were interested in stuff that I was passionate about at the time. And so I was doing all this learning, and I was like, I'm really trying to integrate this into my in-person business, but it wasn't going so well. And so one thing I loved about social media was advice that I had gotten from Jordan Syatt, who I attribute to being a huge mentor at the time, sat down with me in New York City for like several hours. And we were talking about this. He's like, if you're feeling passionate about this and you post about it on social media a lot, you will, in theory, attract others who are, passionate about that or care that you care about that and want that service from you. And that's exactly what happened. Online coaching it's not that it boomed, but maybe even my first 10 clients, I was feeling so ignited emotionally to go ahead and be like, wow, I'm using these skills. I get to work with clients on stuff that I'm excited about, that I've learned about. And so pre-pandemic, not as a savvy business move, purely maybe you could say a lucky business move, I sold my portion of the brick and mortar in-person gym and moved 100% online. And wow, the total 180. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have a similar moving online at some point, but for me, that it was very, very palpable, very tangible aha moment of like totally 100% in my element. For sure. So that is my long arced story of how I ended up here today.
Yeah, it's really cool with that timing. I wouldn't say you got lucky. You saw the writing and what was most important to you. What's really interesting, and I don't know if I've ever shared this before, but I was actually never an in-person trainer. I went right from being having another career to online space, because really, if I'm being completely truthful, I had and still have bits of just social anxiety. So it was easier for me to just remove that negative part of my personality and go online. But yeah, it's always an interesting thing that comes up there. But that's really, really cool. Where was where was the gym location? Where is home? Because I know you're in Austin now, but where was before?
It's in Bergen County, New Jersey. So if you live in New York City and take the George Washington Bridge out, it's the first exit. I lived 6 minutes from the bridge. And it's a very affluent area, and I'm not shitting on very affluent areas, but it was, it was a lot of, man, this is tough because I think that no area can be generalized so far, but I've come too deep in the sentence to turn around now. It wasn't a lot of super high goal driven, it was a lot of hey, I wanted to come in and exercise to check a box, which by the way is freaking awesome. And more people should be checking an exercise box. I love that so much. I was at the time very, very excited to apply some of the things I was learning. And it at some point, I felt I had outgrown that a little bit. Not that I was better than it, but I had pursuits elsewhere. That's all it was.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep. So I 100% relate to the palpability of moving online, because as soon as I was fully online, we moved our family and our 8-month-old to Costa Rica for 3 months and realized that you can work from anywhere. And that was just a beautiful thing. So one real quick thing on your background that I'm just personally curious about is that you have mentioned on your stories and stuff that you had asthma and that you don't particularly like cardio and that you're not particularly good at it. And there's just so much of that resonates with me. Aside from the asthma, the other two mentions of cardio are right. And you're speaking to my heart, So when did the asthma become a thing? Because I know you were a soccer player. So how did that impact that? And then have you done anything to kind of improve cardio or tried to since then?
So it was at its worst, it was allergy-induced asthma and exercise-induced asthma. And so when I had I'd spent many years allergic to everything that's outside. So trees, grass, mold, different leaves, literally if it was a freshly mowed lawn and we went to go play soccer, I was inept. I was immobile, and so I got that taken care of with years of shots. And after that went away and it was just left with kind of the baseline asthma that wasn't exaggerated by anything too much. It became good enough where I could play competitive sports, played in college for a tiny bit of time, but it was, if I just said this to Jenna the other day, it seemed that there was always a ceiling from what I know now about adaptations and the way the body responds, I should have been able to progress at least maybe with a lower ceiling and maybe from a lower starting point because of potentially genetic lack of those adaptations, but also potentially because asthma brings upon those ceilings. But it just didn't seem to get to a point where I was ever on par with everyone else on the field. And so the position that I play in soccer is a position that was either self-selected because of this or because of other skills and tactics. It was a center attacking midfield, which doesn't track back on defense very, very much, and does a little bit of the creative work, but then also doesn't do a lot of the grunt work, which is either self-selected or, whatever was, however that happened. But so I was able to kind of deal with that from an athletic perspective for a while. But, I know you guys are in a metabolic phase right now, Bryan, or you're in a metabolic phase. I am currently in a systemic deload. And these are moments where, you put on your story once, you're like, wow, like this is a good sign. I can be motivated by the fact that I need these adaptations because this shouldn't be so hard for me. Part of me feels that way. Part of me fucking hates it anyway, so the part of me is like, yeah, great. I totally need these adaptations. And the part of me is like, fuck this. It's the combination of the excitement about working on something you're bad at with the lack of that being fun because you're bad at it.
What I want to know is like whether I actually am going to see improvement from doing this or not, because I also, much like you, have felt like I had this ceiling that was premature compared to the people around me. And so exactly like your story with the midfielder that didn't go back on defense in soccer, that was me in basketball. Like I just was the guy that ran the baseline and shot threes, and like they didn't really expect me to play much defense. And so so it's just like we go into these metabolic cycles, and I am like, for the moment, I'm motivated being like, yes, maybe there is improvement that I can garner from this, and that maybe is also why I'm interested in the VO2 max stuff. Cause it's like, will this metabolic phase in some capacity improve this really low VO2 max marker that I have? So anyway, thank you for your contribution. I was just curious on all that.
The irony is I'm playing soccer like 3 or 4 times a week. I'm playing more soccer now than I have in a decade because we moved to Texas and my girlfriend's a fiance. Wow, fancy. She was a D1 soccer player, and it's something we love to do together. So we're on a couple co-ed teams, which are like actually more competitive than my men's teams. And I was saying to you the other day, I was like, I'm curious why I'm not like in like tip-top shape at this point, And so recently I started actually pulling my inhaler out again and seeing if it made any difference. Because, how do you parse out, do I not have these cardio adaptations, or is it in fact the asthma? And so my thought was like, well, if I treat the asthma and I'm left with just my base level of conditioning, what is that like? And so I've been taking the inhaler. It's been actually helping a lot. And so it realizes that maybe I'm not as inept as I thought. Maybe it is the asthma a little bit, but for the metabolic cycle thing, if we want a tangent on that, like I'm very curious at how that manifests in a way that I actually feel that is more than theoretical. Because the theoretical, we could just list them off. They exist. It's very easy to say, but is it going to manifest itself in a way that is tangible? Yes. Is the question.
No, exactly. And then what metrics would you use to determine whether this 2 or 3 week period, right? Or even if it's up to 5, like call it a mesocycle or whatever, 2 to 5 weeks. How do we know that small period of time had some positive impact?
But you're talking about metrics, that is absolutely how you should do it. But the metrics are a proxy in theory. I would want them to be a proxy for something that I actually feel. And so it's a combination of the objective and the subjective, where it's like, is my HRV, going up? Is my resting heart rate coming down? My respiratory rate, all that stuff. Are these things improving? Whatever metrics you might be using. But like, is that affecting something that I can feel? Like that stuff's cool, and that will keep me going because we want to celebrate micro progressions. We want to know we're on the right path. But is that actually, am I going to return to my hypertrophy training with a tangible ability to tolerate volume better? Am I going to, some of these things, am I going to find that I sleep better, that I'm dealing with inflammation better? Like, are those things, I don't mind leaning on this knowledge that it's happening in the background, but I would also like to, know, okay, well, what is that? How does that manifest in a way that I'm like a phenotype genotype thing, where it's like actually changing something about my day to day or my training or whatever?
Yeah, I can get on board for sure with the idea that over 3 weeks, the actual workout I'm doing is going to feel easier for relatively the same output. But again, going to your point, like coming back to the hypertrophy phase, then like where are the kind of tangible things of like this really actually is aiding my hypertrophy now, versus even if it didn't, right? I guess the opportunity cost of not doing the metabolic phase is super low. And so either way, it's like, hypertrophy is forgiving. Like you do the metabolic phase, great. Like maybe it doesn't work for you, but it's not like you're now 2 steps backwards when you go back to hypertrophy. You're just probably right where you left off.
Just to add in a little tangent there, for me, one of the biggest interesting possibilities to explore there for not necessarily myself, but for clientele is glucose uptake, right? And insulin sensitivity, right? If you've been pushing a hypertrophy phase and your fasting blood glucoses are starting to creep higher and higher, could something like this with, let's say maybe something like a berberine, whatever, for a 5-week cycle or whatever, reset that enough to where you're back down in the 80s or something, and now you can ramp those carbs, even higher, and now extend that runway for this hypertrophy phase, while keeping the insulin sensitivity in your health as a priority as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, let's do it. So I guess let's talk about running the group coaching program. So one thing that's really, really cool, and what I think is unique with you guys specifically, is one thing, and I've talked about this before, but to me, Bryan's always been like kind of ahead of the curve a little bit, and I've always kind of viewed him as that. But just with running these group coaching programs, especially in the style that you guys do, right? And said, because there's a lot of people, right, running, generally based programming, it's a lot of like, here's your workouts, right? But the way you guys are doing it, it's very educational. On top of it, it follows a larger hierarchy and overarching structure of taking people through what's the word I'm looking for? Like adaptations over a period of time, which is really, really cool. So I just wanted to have a larger conversation around it, because I know Bryan and I get a good amount of coaches listening to this podcast too. And I'm sure for myself and also the coaches that listen to it, it's things that they might want to explore too. So I just wanted to have a really cool conversation from two guys that do it really, really well, and just hear your thoughts, like why you used maybe this platform versus that platform, and just how you got it off the ground, right? And then how you continue to deliver, right, such a high quality product with such, to me, from my standpoint, Jordan, you get like a lot of really, really good engagement and stuff on it from something that a lot of people might at the surface view as like a negative. Like, why would I want to join a group coaching thing as opposed to like a one-on-one or something like that? So I just want to have a larger conversation around it with two guys that do it really, really well.
Yeah, and there's you hit the nail on the head of actually what is that probably somewhat from a monetary standpoint a downside, which is actually trying to implement some sort of arc, some sort of purpose, some sort of longer, some quote air quote periodization, some more education. I value those. I see those all as value adds. I see those all as things that I like to do. But I laugh with my dad's not entirely like fresh off the boat. He won't listen to this, but he didn't grow up with money. And so the idea that I could be making more money if I were to just make it more gen pop, and that I'm implementing some layers of complexity. I don't think that it's complex. I have plenty of ranked beginners who come in there and do great. But the fact that there is purposeful layers of complexity and education that go into it, and thus I lose some people doing that, is just like unfathomable. And so I think it is, Bryan will attest to this, that like I will be not in a constant battle, like it's something I worry about 24/7, but it is a constant like recalibration of how much variation are we going to put into this? How much education do I want? How much do I want to ask of the user? How turnkey do I want this to be? And am I okay with the outcome of those combinations of things, especially when we are bombarded with, I'd say mostly people, if I put mine and Bryan's groups together, I'd say most people who are doing it more simplistically, and I don't mean that in a negative or condescending way. I just mean that in like a geared towards the more or less experienced lifter, where like I'm bombarded with that and very constantly kind of having to recalibrate my thoughts on how much I want to ask of the user. And so, Bryan, I'm sure you've experienced something similar.
Yeah. One of the things that I think you do really well, and I try to do really well as well, is speak with tempered language about things, right? One of the things you guys actually just discussed on the podcast that you did together on Jordan's channel was using language that isn't so absolute. And so I find myself constantly in the group responding to questions when someone's like, can I do this instead of this? I'm like, well, here are the advantages to doing that. Here's why you might not want to do that, And then there's some that are, to the point where I'm like, yeah, I really would not advise that. Like, as an example, today we have in our metabolic phase, we have the 6 sets of 8, the incomplete rest method with leg curls. And this girl writes and goes, hey, I really like RDLs. Can I just do RDLs instead of leg curls for this? And I'm like, well, knee flexion and hip flexion and stretch overload and short overload. And I'm like, so no, I would not exactly advise that. So there's situations like that too. And so, how do you find yourself kind of handling, similar issues, and what type of language do you use?
Just a very simple like weighing of pros and cons, where like these are your list of best to worst options, and this is where that option might fall. And so if someone's like, hey, I want to do an IRM RDL instead of this seated leg curl or lying leg curl, I might say, well, okay, fine, but if you want to do these might be better options if you want to keep with the IRM style. And if you really have your heart set on doing an RDL, maybe we don't do it IRM style, because maybe just the axial loading is just going to be brutal for IRM. Seems insane to me. And so just to, I think one of the effects Coach Cassim has had on me through this whole process of going through all N1 courses is just like understanding that there's and Lane Norton too, this understanding of like compared to what and where on the hierarchy is this, and how much more or less important is this. Yes, it's important to rank. And Aaron and I loved our chat on this where it's important to rank things from better or worse compared to the alternatives. Totally. That's step one though. Step two is how far are those things apart? Because certain things could be better and worse than others, but that is a binary yes or no statement. That is not a relative statement that tells me how far away these things are. And so a lot of times, a lot of questions about swaps. It's totally a big one that I get. I don't want to do this. Can I do this? And it's like, I don't want to do, a barbell front squat. Could I do a, glute dominant low bar squat? And it's like, okay, well, here's where we're moving kind of away from what the point was. Here's the ways that maybe we can bridge that gap and get you closer to what I meant for this. And then there's sometimes I find myself saying, like at the end of one of these kind of questions in the group, where it's like, you could also just tell me to fuck off and just do this anyway. And I don't think it would be the end of the world, but just know that in this context, you have deviated from what the point was. And it's not the end of the world, but these options might be a little bit closer to what we meant. And so I think it's important to put things in better and worse order, but also discuss how far away certain things are from what might be, near optimal. But I've really enjoyed that, frankly, that discussion with the group and having people, what I really want in this whole, just whether it's one-on-one coaching or group coaching, is I just want to cultivate a group of more informed consumers, people who are a little bit savvier with the way they think about things. And so if I can just get you to understand where I'm coming from here's how I want you to look at this. Yes, the barbell front squat and the low bar back squat are both squats, but just this is how far we've deviated from what the point was. Here's the consequences of that, which is not that much. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, it's quite different, but I want people to start to think about these trade-offs, the better or worse. Also, how far away are we deviating from what's optimal? What are the consequences of those choices? And am I okay with those consequences? And if I am, then I'm super happy for you, and that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good way to put it, and it's something. And this leads back to the conversation that you and I had, Jordan. It's like, are we starting with the beginning of the sentence or the end of the sentence, right? So I had a client, this literally happened last night, asking me, because I was like, hey, he's a what I call a unicorn problem, right? He's trying to put on weight, wants to add muscle mass, incredibly active job. He's already lean, already I'm like, we're going to have to pump so much carbohydrate into you. We just need to make things simpler. So I was like, I want like 75 grams of intra-workout carbohydrate type thing, Gatorade. And he was like, well, can I do Powerade? And I was like, for all intents and purposes, like, yes, you can do Powerade. Technically, right, Powerade is a high fructose corn syrup versus Gatorade is a dextrose, chemically identical to table sugar, right? So I'm like, does it matter? Not really, but am I going to give you like the proper answer just because I think it's important to not, because people miss these things, right? And with that, it's like what you were saying, like, where are you on your spectrum and what are the consequences, right? If you're super green to training, right, is it going to make a difference? Probably not. But if you're someone who has like long levers and maybe some lower back issues, yeah, that low bar back squat is probably going to have more of a consequence or a trade-off as opposed to that type of thing. So it's like understanding that spectrum, how far you might find yourself on it, and being able to, like, as a coach, right, or a leader, an educator position, being able to have that conversation and have people understand where they are, and it's important. It's really, really important in my opinion, personally.
I love that context, Aaron. That's great. Do you have anything to add to that, Jordan, before I ask something else?
No, that's good. I just wanted to kind of curtail that with just like, I think that I know that Aaron does one-on-one, not a group, right?
It's an interesting container. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, Bryan's certainly doing a bit more of the group. And regardless of whether you guys are doing, I'm finding that I asked myself a question the other day of would I enjoy either as much as doing both? And so I have a crop of one-on-one that I've shrunk down to make room in my life for the group. And I get a chance to go deep and have those like higher EQ, like a bit more. Like I posted this morning about something that really like hits home for me from a one-on-one perspective. But when I read that, it doesn't apply at all necessarily to the group coach me as much. Because I'm not going as deep with each individual there. But I just feel like from a group coaching perspective and from a one-on-one coaching perspective, I might appreciate the other one more because the other one exists. And so I get a chance to go deep when there's opportunities to go deep with a one-on-one client. I get the chance to like see how I can streamline something and, get more out of less with a group in terms of like how much education or cueing I'm doing for certain things. So it's a nice balance of both challenging myself to grow as a coach, but also trying to be a better problem solver.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing you said about the messages kind of being different, whether you're talking to like a one-on-one client or a group program, I notice that all the time. And it even kind of overflows into the way I program an individual versus a group. Like an individual doesn't really have like a template that's followed. It's kind of a feedback driven system of, tell me what's going on, fill out this check-in form, let's have a discussion, and then we'll figure out your next week of training. Whereas the group program, you're just trying to do what's best for the most people possible. So yeah, I fully relate to that for sure. So cardio, we get this all the time in our group programs where, we don't program cardio in the physique program. We have a hybrid program that does include cardio because we've got this question so much. So it's, of course, the easy answer is it's just an opportunity cost. Hey coach, I want to add in 3 running sessions on top of your 4 weight sessions. Like, what's your response to that person that wants to do 3 sessions on top of 4 and now they're training 7 days a week or something along those lines?
My gut when you said that was the magnitude of what you want to implement on top of my programming. The higher that magnitude, like the greater the thing that you want to add in, the more likely I would seek out a personal one-on-one coach. If someone's like, hey, I want to add in, I want to make sure I want to get 12,000 steps a day and I'm not going to do any running, but is it okay if I up my activity that much? Yes, you're good to go. You're fine. But if I'm like, hey, I want to also do, 3 CrossFit classes and an interval session. Now it's like, hey, like, this might be a place where we want to go offline and you want to get somebody to customize this a bit more. And so initially it's like how big of it's a matter of that's not a scalable approach for me to be dealing with. And I know that, and it wasn't like the type of question, but that's not a scalable approach for me to be like, yeah, here's exactly how you modify my program. But if there's something really easy of like me telling that person, hey, why don't you just run it 3 days a week cyclically and do like a week 1 is day 1, 2, 3. Week 2 is day 4, 1, 2, and then you can fit this on top of that. Like I might give an answer like that and then curtail it with, hey, if you want something more specific, this is where it blurs that line of like maybe go to an online coach or a one-on-one coach that you can really, you're asking for a more complex programming across the week. And so the more complex, the more specific and individualized something is, the more I'd recommend going and finding somebody to work one-on-one with.
Yeah, for sure. I think ultimately it becomes like, okay, you're programming 4 days a week of strength training. So you are saying this is kind of the amount of like work or volume or fatigue that we're going to do this week. So when someone comes in and says, I'm going to add X number of running sessions on top of your program, then I think my first response is always to be like, okay, where can we pull back somewhere else, which is kind of what you said, like rolling sessions over to the next week, that type thing. So yeah, fully on board with you on that one.
How would you answer if somebody's like, let's say they want to add 1 CrossFit session in per week, and what's it? And it has to be somewhat generalized. The answer, of course, where it's like, how do I know I'm doing too much? Is kind of that question of like, how do I know when I shoved too much shit on top of our group here that what are the signs and symptoms? I know that's like, it could be a broad spectrum, but like what might be a general answer that you would tell that person?
So the first thing I usually do is talk about the blurring of diagnostics. And I talk a little bit about kind of how, yes, this is a general program. What I'm trying to do is assign a general amount of volume that I think is going to work for the most people possible. But what you have to understand is that, yes, you might be on one of those outliers. Like say you're even the person that's on the lower side and you're like, I could handle more volume now. Well, now you do this CrossFit class. So maybe you're making up the volume that you like could do, but how do we assign that volume to anything? So then you go into your next week of training and maybe you're not making progress, or a few weeks later, you're not making progress. It's not as easy of an equation for us to be like, okay, well, we have, 14 sets of this muscle group and 16 sets of that one and 12 here. It's more like, well, we had 12, 14, and 16, but now we have hang, clean and jerks and toes to bar and push-ups and box jumps. So who the fuck knows how much volume we actually have to work with? So the explanation of kind of the diagnostic piece is something that I usually talk about. But there are also, of course, a number of different ways that you can approach that.
Yeah, I think that there's an element of like the big overarching umbrella here is like if you add something that now with that volume thrown into your like total bucket of stress that you can handle, if by adding that you are no longer able to progress at the rate that is either that you've been accustomed to because you've been doing this for several mesocycles, or that I've estimated that you'll be able to progress, or you're not progressing at all, or you're regressing, then I think that's a very clear sign that that glass has overflown and that you have been trying to shovel too much shit in there. And there's your body's fighting really, really hard just to recover and doesn't have a lot of these excess resources to actually adapt and improve. And so this like lack of actual progress is really good. But you brought up a good point. Maybe it's week 1 and week 2, you do progress. But and that glass, I use that like bucket analogy. That bucket's filling up. Maybe it's not full just yet, but by week 3 and 4, you're starting to see those stagnations and those regressions where normally maybe you wouldn't have seen that till week 5 and 6. And so I do think it's an indication of like, if you've been doing a program for a while by itself, then you add something and you see your performance change either immediately or at some point across the mesocycle where you're unable to progress. If you progress slower, progressing is progressing. I'd still be super happy with that. But if you are not progressing where you would have been, or if the expectation of the program is that you would, then that would at least give me like a skeptical eyebrow of like, I'm not sure necessarily if you can handle all this.
You've talked before about the idea of getting small wins week to week. And I feel like that's a message that's super important just across the board. I mean, I find it super important for myself to the point that I tend to use micro loading, or as you and I discussed, Jordan, increasing partial reps as a way to just say like, hey, I did more than last time, So I think that when it comes to people in our group programs, like if they're just doing the same thing week after week and not seeing the improvement and getting these small wins, then you and I have a problem. So yeah. Cool. Anything else to add on that one, Aaron?
To take it back to the cardio thing, what I will generally do is I will ask a couple more questions why, right? When someone's like, oh, well, I started running this week. I'm like, well, why? And I'm like, are you actually interested in running, or do you think it's going to further facilitate some adaptation that you want? And that's generally what they think. They're like, oh, I'm going to have fat loss by adding running. I'm like, if you want fat loss, we're just going to sleep an extra hour and we're going to go on some walks. And you get to sleep more, right? The rest of your day is going to feel better. And you don't have to add something that you don't even want to do for some like fallacy thought that you think it's going to further facilitate what you want from an adaptation standpoint. So for anyone listening out there, like just make sure you understand the reason why you're adding something, right? So I had another example. I had a client who was training like 5 days a week, and then he was kickboxing 4 days a week. And I'm like, bro, no, why are we kickboxing? He's like, oh, well, it's an hour I get to spend with my daughter. I was like, okay, this is fantastic. We're going to keep the kickboxing in. We're going to reduce training, because but like we don't need both, but one serves a different purpose than like training, right? It's a bonding type thing with his daughter. Of course, we're going to keep that in. Let's pull back the training then. So really just understanding what is the real reason someone wants to add this additional volume on top or something like that. And many times you will find it's like obfuscated under some other reasoning or something like that.
When optimal meets practical, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. No, that's such a good point. I mean, it's not necessarily what you do; it's the intent with which you do it. It's like asking why somebody is doing something. It tells you a lot about where you'll go from that. It's not just what you want to do; it's tell me why you want to do that. Opens up me as the coach, maybe providing some alternative perspectives of ways you might be able to get what you say you want. I mean, if you came to me because you want to know the best route to things, then kind of tell me why you're thinking certain things so that maybe I can provide some different perspective. I mean, it happens literally all the time. It's like, should I should I add some HIIT cardio? And you're like, well, all right, well, why? Do you like HIIT? Or they're like, no. I just mean like, I want to get a little fat loss going. I'm like, okay, well, so that's like a really nice, like you said, beginning of the conversation is like kind of just diving into the why behind things, help provide a little bit more context.
Definitely. There was one other thing that I wanted to ask, but I cannot remember it. So I guess, Bryan, are you ready to move on?
Yeah. You want to go with the next topic?
Yeah. So this is one thing that I know Bryan has done, which was really, really cool. And you are in the process of, and really just building a badass home gym. And one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is going into like equipment selection. And let me kind of back up and say why. So obviously with the pandemic, right, had this huge boom of the home gym. I don't even want to call it a movement, but just desire, right? Because you couldn't go anywhere. That being said, when people are building a home gym or a garage gym, the default, at least generally here in the States, is going to be the rogue route. I get the squat rack, the bar, the bumpers, maybe a rower, something like that. And something that I will like challenge a lot of my clientele who have come from that aspect is like, well, what is your desired outcome? Do you want to do CrossFit? And they're like, no, I just want to like look good and, keep as much muscle mass as I can into this next stage of my life. So I'm like, then let's change the model a little bit around the type of equipment we're buying, right? Maybe we buy a functional trainer instead of like a $7,000 squat rack or something like that. Or what are some different things? So I just want to have that conversation with you as you are in this process. Like what are your big kind of pillars of equipment selection, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The first question is, what's the goal? I think if someone's like, hey, I want to squat, bench, deadlift, I want to do CrossFit, then you need to go the rogue route. You need bumpers, you need dumbbells, you need a bench, you need a rower, you need a pull-up bar, all that stuff. And then P.S. you might need that stuff even if you don't necessarily want to do CrossFit, but it does open this first discussion of like, what do I want to do? And so I think goals is the first like bucket to kind of fill up and to understand what your goal is. And I think, let's say you had a goal of CrossFit or strength. I just want to get stronger at the squat, bench, deadlift. That's something that maybe there's an emotional tie to that. Maybe that's just something they like doing. And so for those, I think we go the rogue route first. We get dumbbell, barbell, plates, rack, all that good stuff. Free weights, quote unquote, is where I would go first. But if somebody's like, yeah, my best goal is hypertrophy and I want to, just look good and feel good, have no joint pain, build some muscle, I'm with you. I would go the functional trainer route. I think those two are the first two huge purchases. It's like enough free weight to challenge compound movements, lower body pressing, lower body hinging, upper body pressing and rowing. Enough weight to do that. If you can do that via dumbbells and barbells, which you very likely can, I think that's a really great place to go. I think you cannot. So my thought was, we think we have to look at things like goals, price, space, the multi-functionality or lack thereof of certain pieces. So what's the added functionality per square footage usage, per price usage? And then not only just the multi-functionality, but like how good are the exercises that you get out of this thing? Some people are like, look, I can do all these like fun, funky things. It's like, well, what if I just, I think Bryan and I have talked offline about getting like a hammer strength row, just so that we can do the step back hammer strength row, because it is like the most practical way to get a relatively like lengthened overload movement for the lats, thoracic, lumbar lat, whatever. And that's not a very functional machine. I mean, when I say functional, I mean, it doesn't have multi-functions. It is you can do 4 exercises off the top of my head that are like reasonably good. It takes up a huge amount of space. And so you might rank that fairly low, but you might actually consider it because of how good the exercise is that you are gaining. And so stuff like that has definitely crossed my mind. And so where I went is we don't have a big, I think it's a 12 by 12 space, which is not a huge space. And so it was just room enough for we went the rogue route, just because I do think that between my fiance and I, there is enough that we would want to do with free weights. As much as I would, gun to head, I would take a functional trainer over the dumbbells and barbells, just from my goals, which would kind of align a little bit more into the hypertrophy, joint health. Just like, not that I said joint health twice, as if people are going to like snap their knees and shoulders because they're doing free weight movements. Of course not. But I'd say that cables on average are probably slightly more joint friendly. And so I would, if it was one or the other, I probably would have went with the functional trainer route. And then I think you could get a lot away with a lot with a functional trainer and some heavy dumbbells. And probably that could be about it. But went the rogue route and the functional trainer route, you can't decide, go with both. And after that, I mean, I've watched Bryan's home gym grow. He's got a freaking pendulum. He's got the chest supported T-bar. He's got a lot of good stuff in there, leg extension, ham curl. So I've kind of poked around and asked him about that sort of stuff. But if we were like really ranking stuff, I'd say your first decision is am I going to go the rogue route and go really free weight heavy? Am I going to go functional trainer cable stack? Because I think that they come out to, you can get a reasonable functional trainer, by the way. I don't know what you guys have, Bryan, in terms of people in the group, but I have a lot of people that are at home with like a $2,000 cable setup, which relatively speaking is cheap, but absolute terms is still quite a bit. But you could, my prime, rack was like turned out to be like 10K. So if you're getting like a real good functional trainer for like 2,000, that can be really, really great. And so I think the free weight and functional trainer would be the first two things that I would look at, and obviously price considering. But those would be by far the first two things. And I would see everything else as somewhat of a luxury, and things that I would then pick up over time.
Yeah, the functional trainer, I think Rep Fitness makes one for like under $2,000. And I've had a couple girls write me and talk about that one and how great it is. When I was looking at mine, I actually didn't look at that model for two reasons. One, because the weight stack didn't go heavy enough. And second, because I heard that it was unstable at heavy weights. But when you're a female that doesn't need more than 100 pounds per stack, like that thing is money. Like I would advise any girl out there that wants a dual cable system to go check that Rep Fitness one out, because I think it's like $1,800.
And that one is so that's like one. It seems like from where I'm sitting that was like one of the first to break into that price point. But there are a lot of competitors that are coming down to that price point that are like making just carbon copies of that Rep Fitness one for like a 1.9, something like that. So it's you can get, and again, like you said, if you're not trying to move 200, 250 per stack, then it's awesome. And I think I advise anybody out there who's looking to spend that much ish that is the route I would go 100%.
Quick question for you, Jordan. What functional trainer did you go with? Because I think we're using these terms kind of a little bit interchangeably, and I just wanted to see what.
Yeah, I didn't actually
Prodigy
go with the
rack, right?
functional trainer with the moving arms. If we're going to go in depth on that process, the Rogue stuff came out to like 10K. No, not true. To like 6,000 or 7,000. And then I wanted to go with something Prime Fitness. I just trust the quality of the brand and have used it many, many times. And so that was something I just like maybe arbitrarily just had my heart set on. And so their options were, they have the selectorized rack, which duals as a squat rack and a functional trainer in the sense of it has a dual cable that can be modified from top to bottom, but it doesn't have the moving arms. They also have the functional trainer, which is more like people see like the Life Fitness one that's in a lot of gyms with like the moving arms that go horizontal and up and down. And so they also have that option, which we used at the N1 seminar, all three of us. And that is an amazing piece. And probably from a cable perspective, that one's better than the cable that I went with. But I went with the selectorized rack because it saved me money on buying a squat rack. And although barbell back squatting is probably not something I'm going to do maybe ever again, seriously, that's just a personal choice. I just think having that rack capacity, even if I use it for filming form videos for instructional purposes, to rack up my RDL so I don't have to pick it up from the ground, or set up a barbell for a glute bridge, or whatever the fact may be, that it had more. This is where like spending an extra 3,000 got me a lot more functionality. It has a lat pull down, like a upper back pull down set up from a top down, has like a pull up bar, has a seated row attachment where you can put your feet up. And so the functional trainer, I was like, yeah, the moving arms are great. And I can think of at least 3 to 6 exercises. Well, that will be so clutch. But the stuff that I was getting extra by having the actual squat rack with the selectorized rack, I think it's the Prodigy rack is actually the name that it was called. And so all in, I was thinking, I don't know how many of you guys know Lindsay Parker. So Lifting Lindsay. So she was my inspiration for that. Her home gym is amazing. And she had said, if you're going to go with the functional trainer that has the moving arms, you would also probably want to buy a single stack, a single top down cable, so that you could have that upper back pull down where you really, if you're thinking of like a traditional lat pull down, I'm going to call it an upper back pull down just out of like annoying semantics. But being able to have that pad on your legs that inhibits you being pulled up is like, you could recreate a vertical pull on the functional trainer. But once you get strong per pound of body weight, you're going to need to be held down in some way. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to lean a little bit in this direction. The annoying part is we just started talking about potentially moving out of this place. And my Prodigy rack, I thought about what it would take to move, and I was like, that's going to be a nightmare to break back down and move. But I thought, I'll get a year out of it, and it'll be a great year of training, and I'll be so happy. And now I think we're going to leave in like 7 months, and I'm thinking like it's going to be here in 1 month. So that's 6 months of use. I'm like, man, I might keep this thing in the fucking box and not put it together. Like I just thought literally this morning, I said, I might leave this thing in the box and not unpack it. Because if I unpack it, put it together, and I have like 5 months of training before we move, and I have to break this down. I'm not Bob the Builder. I'm not super handy. If this thing's going up, it's going up, and I'm moving it as one piece. I'll fucking tie it down to the top of something, and it just kind of struck me as like, all right, well, maybe consider what I'm going to do with that. But yeah, that was a big long rant.
Dude, you're talking the things of nightmares to me, man. Like literally, we just spent 5 weeks in San Diego, and all the questions were like, so are you moving back? Like, are you coming back? I'm like, dude, I have a home gym. I can't move the home gym. Like, look at that.
What am I going to do with the home gym?
I wouldn't even, like, it's in the basement. It's not even like it's in the garage and I can get the stuff out, It's like, if you're buying my house, you're getting the home gym. That's just like staying, So I can definitely relate to that. But on the point of the Prodigy rack, man, like, having the pull down where the knees are secured is one of my two only things that I feel like I'm missing right now in my home gym. And so I just bought a new 45-degree hyperextension. So I have my calves secured where I have an old shitty one that didn't have that. But I feel like I'm missing that, the upper back pull down thing with the knees secured, and then a converging chest machine of some sort. And the converging chest machine is just never going to happen unless I like get rid of the pendulum or something like that. So that just kind of is what it is. But I'm like literally racking my brain trying to figure out ways that I can manufacture some sort of knee supported pull down there. So I'll keep fighting the good fight for that one and just be jealous that you have that.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, the reason I asked there is when I was in Scottsdale, I'd work out with Jeremiah Bear in his gym, and he has that prime rack, and I was like blown away by it. It is it's everything. It's obviously not everything, but like 80% of your upper body training that you could do in a gym, in a commercial gym, you can do at home on that thing. And I was like, this is awesome. So yeah, that's why I was asking. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
That's funny because Jeremiah was actually the literal person that I spoke to. Lindsay as well, but Jeremiah is the person who talked me into it. I have exactly what he has. He got the 1 through 100 Rogue dumbbells and then the Selectorized rack. And those were the first two things he bought. And he talked me 100% into that exact purchase. Rogue, ironically, sent me, it's funny, they really messed up with shipping. It was embarrassing. They sent half the stuff and then like 6 weeks later sent the other half of the stuff because they forgot it. But they sent me an extra 1 through 50 dumbbell. So I have like and that's like, I'm going to do like, I want to just do like a good deed giveaway to like somebody in Texas who like wants to build out their home gym. But that's funny because Jeremiah was my inspiration. I saw him in his garage. My setup is a similar space to his. And so he's got the Cybex squat press, which is epic.
I was just going to say that.
We went ham on that thing.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Oh, it's amazing. And so I got the Hex Bar, the Prime Hex Bar too. That was something we talked about. And yeah, that Cybex squat. If we look at like if we're talking like dream home gym stuff, we're looking at like the Atlantis hack and seated hack combo. I love Bryan, your leg extension seated ham curl. That's like a must. I think knee flexion extension is the one thing that like we program in the group all the time. And it's a lot of band work. And if you have a cable stack, we do cable like knee flexion extension. If we have bands, then we're doing band knee flexion extension. And for whatever it's worth, man, that to me is it works. We make it work, man. We have had some really hellacious, band knee flexion extension work, which I'm very proud of, frankly. But that machine goes a long way if legs is something that's really of priority to you.
Yeah, I can definitely testify to that. Like the difference between going from like bands to cables and then to the actual machine itself are all like 3 progressive levels, right? Like I used to have a single stack cable before you and I were even connected. I had a single stack. And so I had cuffs and I would get these long daisy chains and I would put one cuff on each thigh and I would do my leg curls and leg extensions that way. And it was just like, it was at the time I was like, man, I'm getting such a good stimulus from this. This is amazing, And then my other machine arrived and I was like, oh, yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
But it is cool that we can be creative and use those types of hacks. And like I noticed like Ruth has that hack that she uses where the leg extension is both a dumbbell and a band. So I think that combining things like that, she does the same thing I think with leg curls so that you get rid of what would be such a lengthened overload movement in each one of those if you just had the dumbbell and then you add the band, and you can kind of even out that resistance curve a little bit. So with all this ingenuity, like there's definitely like pretty solid home base options for that.
If your feet are larger than a size 2, you ain't fitting that dumbbell on your feet. I've tried that variation a billion times, and like every time I put it on, I'm like, Ruth, you make this look so good. I'm like, are your feet? Do you have like elf feet? Like, there's just no way that I just can't fit the dumbbell. I can't fit both, and I don't have big feet. But so I have that variation in my group, and it says like, if you're wondering why your feet don't fit in the middle of like where the bar is for the dumbbell, and you're not able to balance it, like you're not alone. Like I don't know how people do this either, but if you like it, that's one of the variations that we use too. So totally, yeah.
Maybe like the monkey feet with a band.
I like the monkey feet too. Nice, I thought about the monkey feet being a mandatory purchase, literally just for standing hand curls and leg extensions. Like, so I don't hate the monkey feet. I think I'll put it somewhere in the optional things that people could buy if they really wanted to optimize. That might be something in the future too. I used to, that falls into the category of something that doesn't have a lot of uses. 2, I think maybe. You could do some hip flexion work. I mean, you could figure it out, but the exercises you do get, what it replaces for somebody who's been just doing band work, I find to be like, okay, this is a purchase. It's not even an expensive purchase, but that's a big one that gives you two movements you really could use.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the one thing you'd be missing in your home gym, if you go with like my number 1 and 2 would also be the dumbbells 1 to 100 and like a Prodigy rack or some sort of functional trainer, right? And then even in my own training right now, I literally don't use a barbell except for RDLs. I don't think I've used a barbell except for RDLs in many a months now. And so I'm not like on the team of, hey, you need a barbell for sure if your goal is hypertrophy. But leg machines would be like the one thing you're lacking, because you kind of scoffed at the high bar pause back squat, which I agree. Like when you have the option of a pendulum or a leg press or a hack squat versus, hey, I'll elevate my heels, put a bar on my back and, really get deep knee flexion here. It's just not the same. So do you have any plans potentially of getting like, maybe top of the list would be like the Cass hack squat, which is obviously super dope, or something else along the lines?
Truthfully, it depends on the proximity of a gym that has that stuff. So right now we are, there's a huge house of bees right outside my window. Anyway, there's a gym that's like allegedly like the Texas, like southern mecca of bodybuilding. It's called House of Gains. Appropriately named, I suppose. Yeah. And it's like super, there's a lot of competitors. There's like a posing room. Long story short though, they have a freaking sea of equipment. And so there's like 2 pendulums, there's 3 amazing hacks. They have a unilateral hip press, like not the one that we used at N1, but it's like a Rogers. Real old one, but it's still amazing. They have a bilateral hip press. They have a bunch of glute drives, and then they're really like up to snuff on the equipment. And so that's really like, it's like an 8-minute drive for me. So I told Jenna, I was like, if we can just make that a day where we go and we hack or we pendulum and we leg extension and we use some of these machines, then we can bridge that gap very easily. But I think if I'm, we're going to be, Bryan's in daddy life. I mean, we're going to be, that's something that is in our future in the next year, maybe year or 2. And so that will be, I want to be as home base as possible. And so I think that a leg extension ham curl would come first. I would take the back squat and I would make that a length. I would sooner integrate that and get the leg extension ham curl to kind of offset the knee flexion extension. And I would live with that. I would live with split squats and barbell squats.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But long term, I mean, the Atlantis, Lindsay just got it, has not really used it, I think, a ton because it's been cold in Utah, but I think she's going to start using it. So you probably see that on her Instagram soon. It's amazing.
I saw it when she first got it, and she was like super amped on unwrapping it and then doing her first set. And
it wasn't even unwrapped, and she was in there like doing reps. I'm like, I don't think it's finished putting together.
I know, amazing.
Yeah. To wrap up this part of the conversation, I actually just got this question yesterday from a client, so I was like, this is perfect with the guys coming on the podcast. So he said, I currently have a squat rack in my home gym. If you had to pick a leg press or a pendulum squat, which would you pick? I'm considering adding one or the other.
Yeah, it's a really tough question. It is a tough question. It's going to come down to, I guess, what you care about more, the exercises that you gain. If we had to be super nitpicky and we look at the pendulum and say, this is probably the best piece of equipment that we have for lengthening the quads, biasing the quads in the lower body pressing movement, it would have to be the most quad biased on the spectrum. And to a very, very high degree of knee flexion, a lot of quad lengthening. And if we look at okay, that's fine. Okay, but I probably only get that. You know, you can make a pendulum more glute biased, but it is less versatile. But you get probably the quote best, if we look at contextually what best means, meaning, you know, most high degree of stability, lengthening of the quad. That's probably the best thing that there is. And so you get the best, but you only get one. Versus the leg press, you might actually get, you could argue that a glute dominant leg press is up there with the best glute exercise you could do, just from such a high degree of stability, such amazing leverages. And you get multiple exercises. You can do adductor leg press, you can do a quad variation leg press, but the downside, you could do calf raises if you're a psycho. But technically, even a glute biased leg press is still a small range of motion and not necessarily a full lengthening. I would probably, it depends, if you're like, hey, I care about, it would come down to me if I cared more about glutes or quads. And if I was like really trying to like blow my quads up, the pendulum is unbelievable. And if I cared more about the versatility, if I was only going to get one and never, ever, ever even consider the other, I'd go with the leg press. But if you like are somebody who's like on the path of acquiring more stuff over the next 5-10 years, then maybe you're like, I really want to blow up my quads. The thing with the pendulum is also we have to consider that like it's giving you like what are your other opportunities to lengthen the quad and to get a lot of knee flexion in a high degree of stability? And the answer is not a lot if you don't have a hack. And so, man, this is a tough one because for me personally, I would get the pendulum because I don't want to back squat. Just to me, it's not a movement I've ever gotten a lot out of with my quads. And when I look at the alternatives for lengthening the glute, I've always been, I could do a glute dominant back squat and would be more likely to. I could do a glute dominant Bulgarian split squat. I can do a bent knee RDL. I can do walking lunges, none of which I hate as much as a high bar back squat for quads. And so to take the machine that gets rid of the thing I hate the most, and I still have plenty of opportunities to work the glutes in the lengthened position, I would go pendulum, but hopefully just that me kind of word vomiting has helped this person, with some context.
I actually love that. Yeah, I think that you answered that with a lot of context, and you actually, if you would have asked me like 1 minute before you wrapped up and said pendulum, which one you were leaning towards, I would have been like, oh, he's going to say leg press. Like the way that you kind of laid that out, because my feeling is that leg press would be my choice probably for all of the reasons that you listed, that it's so versatile, blah, blah. I think the one caveat that would really, really make the leg press my choice would be if there was a way that you could set up in that leg press to make it extremely quad dominant, like kind of the way that I do in my inverted leg press, where I can put the feet low, use the heel wedges and get a lot of knee flexion out of that, versus if it's just like a standard leg sled where you're just kind of stuck with the angle of the sled and you can't really do too much. You can't use heel wedges or anything along those lines. And then I'll also add that if you did want glutes on the pendulum, I was completely unaware of this until I actually did it, but single leg work on the pendulum is pretty fucking glute dominant. I mean, pelvic instability and all of that. Like I felt it in my quads when doing the single leg pendulum, but where was sore the next 3 days? Not my quads. My ass, right? So anytime you do anything single leg, you're inevitably going to get a bunch of glute in there. And so this actually kind of feeds into my next question, but I'm going to hang tight and let Aaron jump in here real quick.
You guys covered it so well. And I think if I had to provide the best answer for the largest majority of people, it would be a leg press, but it has to be the right type of leg press, one that maybe has the double angled platform like the Arsenal leg press has like the bottom portion of the platform leans to allow for more dorsiflexion, and then the top kind of kicks back. That would help with the more glute. It has to be the right type of leg press, because like what you said, a bent knee RDL or something like that you can already perform with the equipment that's already in there. The pendulum is really it's like the best for the quad, but it's a one trick pony, more or less. I think I would have to say the leg press, but the right type of leg press. Bryan, you're muted.
Yeah, I realized I was muted too. It's definitely interesting for sure. So the next thing I just wanted to jump into real quick was to talk about Jordan and I were having an off-air discussion right before we jumped on here about split squats. And Aaron and I have talked about this on the podcast too. So I'm just going to open with a very general statement and see if you agree. that even if you do a split squat that is as quad dominant as possible, it's probably still at best like a 50% quad, 50% glute.
I would have to give more thought to the 50% mark.
No, it's a random, it's a good mix of glute and quad.
100% yes. Yeah. Oh my God, yes, without a doubt. And that might not be something that's apparent at first until when you've tried to get yourself out of a hole of a really, really deep split squat, that you've realized that like that quad ain't doing it alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say like using soreness as the proxy, I can set up in a rear foot elevated where I'm lengthening the rec fem on the back and I'm getting tons of knee flexion in the front and like all the things that we were taught at N1. And then I'm like, the next day I wake up and like the quads are they're kind of sore, but the glutes are like really, really sore, right? And then you alternatively could do it the opposite way where you're literally trying to set the split squat up as like a glute dominant movement versus being, quad dominant at all. And then there's almost zero quad. It's just like, oh, this is like really all glutes, and you don't feel any quad in there at all. So I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying with the pendulum about the pelvic instability, in that anytime that you do anything single leg, you're just going to have a little bit more glute contribution than you probably would with a similar execution of a bilateral movement.
This is total anecdote, but I've found that let's say you take a heel dominant or a heel elevated, front heel elevated split squat for quads, and we have a little bit more of a forward and back movement. We have a little bit more of like a move like an escalator versus an elevator. We're moving a little bit more forward and back. So we're really pursuing terminal / end range knee flexion. If you guys have seen like the what's his name, knees over toes guy, like imagine we're doing something like that. Potentially not as deep, potentially, but whatever. I found that it's that glute involvement only really kicks on, again, sensation and anecdote here, but only kicks on in the transition from the eccentric to concentric. Like when I'm doing an eccentric phase, when I'm doing the eccentric phase of a split squat like that, my quads are, man, I'm lasered in, I'm locked in, I'm feeling the lengthening. And then when I hit that end range and I push back out of that, that's when I feel a glute kick on. So what I've experimented with in the past is an eccentric dominant heel elevated split squat. And so ipsilateral loaded, so holding a dumbbell only on the same side as the front leg. And then the opposite side leg holding onto something where I can give myself a little bit of help out of the hole. And so maybe a 4 or 5 second eccentric and then giving some help on the concentric out of the hole. And then, maybe on the top 70% of the movement on the way back, feeling it less in my glutes. And I feel that way with squats too. Sometimes I'm doing squats and I'm like, wow, my quads on the way down in the eccentric, I'm really feeling a good lengthening. But when I stand up, it's like, a call to arms of all muscles that could possibly help, even if I'm in like a more quad dominant stance. And so I found something that I've experimented with putting in the group. Obviously that's like a big element of like, how much am I going to teach this? But if you could just do the eccentric there, I feel like that is something that I've also heard, because we did heel elevated split squats in the group for the first 3 mesocycles in a row, which was a crazy ask for a group of people that have never actually done any knee flexion, which is basically everybody, never put their knee past their toe. And I got a lot of people that are like, wow, on the eccentric, like I'm really getting this quad lengthening and to push myself out of the hole. And maybe that's because they were posterior tilting at the bottom, or they were going too deep, or they were leaning too far forward. And these are all possible things, but I've also experienced that. And so, yeah, just from like trying to make your split squat more, you might find that as like a route worth exploring.
I think mechanistically that makes a ton of sense too, since we're stronger in the eccentric, that you can actually like make the quad do the work. But that when you get to the bottom of that heavy loaded split squat, the quad is like, hey dude, I need some help getting back out of here, and recruits a little glute to get back up. So I love that actually. The single arm loaded, hand supported, I use that a lot in my own training as well. And I always put it forward as an option in the group, but most people don't take it because there's still a lot of part of that mindset of like, well, I want to be functional. I want to know how to like balance when I'm doing it too, and it's like, goes back to that, what is your actual goal here? Like why would you do that? Why would you not do that? But that's really interesting. I really actually like that and appreciate that suggestion.
Yeah.
Just to add my kind of add on to it, that is a movement that has been like it's been a game changer for how I view things. And I mean, I have demolished my quads with that front foot wedge, rear foot elevated split squat. And it has to be that way. When I try and do it with just the front foot wedge and not elevating that back foot, I mean, I have to elevate both feet just because my femurs are of a certain length. But when you can line that up right, and perform it correctly, I mean, it will demolish your quads. It has been it's definitely, if I would say, if I had to pick like a top 5 light bulb movements of my lifting career, that would hands down make it. And it's just like, but it takes a lot of mental space to perform it right. And majority of people just are not going to take that time to set it up and dick with everything just to try and achieve it there. But when you do, it can be really, especially if you have limited equipment, right? Anyone can grab some heel wedges off of Amazon or something like that for pretty inexpensive. You already have the dumbbells. You get a box or 2 boxes or whatever, those step platforms in there. You have a very new avenue to run a progressive brand new movement, which should be cool.
That's the sort of movement that we're running that in my mesocycle right now. Front heel elevated, rear foot elevated. With the goal of stride length being short enough to work the rec fem in the back leg, enough knee flexion in the front leg to work the front leg quad. And that's like, I'm like 600 people of form videos into like realizing that this is a tough thing to tinker with from person to person. And so that is also just an element of like circling back to the group discussion of like, well, I really have a threshold of good enough that I need to get everybody to. And, you know, I offer unlimited form video. You can send as many form videos as you want. And I'm sure that isn't scalable forever, but for now I don't mind doing it. But it gets to a point where it's like, man, you are above this threshold of good enough. And maybe we can tinker with it a little bit more, but sometimes it's difficult for where I'm going to draw that line for myself of like, yeah, you know, I'd love to see your foot back 1 inch, you know, like, so at some point I'm like, you got the height of the back leg right. You have the amount of knee flexion right. You have your torso upright if that's what we want. And so there's some element of like letting people know it's like, hey, it looks really good from here, maybe tinker with this, but I want to get everyone to a threshold of good enough to get the right stimulus, the right muscles and not hurt themselves first.
Yeah. Bryan, I'm curious in your experience, what's a moment that you've been on the fence of incorporating something, whether it's a type of stimulus or a movement that you had whatever you decided for or against, and maybe like what kind of why? Not to put you on the spot. This is my podcast, by the way. I'm interviewing you guys.
No, I love.
But I'm curious because that's like
one of my favorite things about podcasting with other podcasters is that they tend to do this, and so I notice myself sometimes doing it on episodes. Well, I was just on with Jeff Hone the other day, and I posed a question to him too, and I was like, oh, what's not even my podcast, you know? No, I love it. It's cool. So I actually have done a lot of mental masturbation of sorts with a lot of the N1 movements on what to include, what's practical, how many other options I should provide, you know, as like an alternative to it. So 100% those ones. What I ultimately ended up deciding on was offering them as a simpler alternative. So instead of, you know, let's do the one in the functional trainer where you're supporting your body and you're like pulling around and, you know, you need the functional trainer with the moving arms and all these things. It was like, we made a video of me doing the 1-arm kneeling iliac lat pull down. And that is like so universally accessible. Like you can do it on a functional trainer or on a normal lat pull down station or whatever. So I ultimately ended up deciding on that variation. And then I filmed a couple of videos of banded alternatives so that if people are at home or whatever, they can do a banded version of it. So that's certainly one. The other ones have really been like safety is something that I consider a lot too. So like personally, I love a back rack split squat, or more specifically a safety bar split squat. But like I wouldn't ask a general population of people where there's so many different varying levels to be like, hey, let's put a bar on your back and then have you do like a really unstable movement where you can't use your hands to help you if you need to, you know? So things like that. Yeah, I would say those are like the first two that really come to mind, but I deal with those similar kind of ideas as far as selection across the board. And then, to go to like the programming side, because I actually wanted to ask you about the way that you program metabolic cycles too. But the way I do it for the group is I actually combine systemic and local into one cycle instead of being like, we're going to do 2 or 3 weeks of systemic and 2 or 3 weeks of local. It's like, you know, we're going to do this circuit here that is like a full body systemic circuit. Then we're going to rest for a bit. And then we're going to come and we're going to do like a 6x8 for leg extensions or something along those lines. So when I program metabolic work, generally for the population, for the group programs, that's the approach I take. How about you?
Yeah, I'm guessing you're making that choice from this is going to be more fun to have like a bit of an integration of both, which it's funny because my one-on-one clients have just over the past year been putting more people through metabolic phases. And when I'll do it, I won't do that, let's say, most of the time. For the most part, let's say we have like a Venn diagram, the overlap will be smaller, and I'll do more systemic whole body conditioning for a couple of weeks, and then move to local conditioning, more AMPK stuff for a couple of weeks. But it's tricky because what you just said is certainly more fun than doing it that way. And so I have yet to experience, although I know those people exist who really like systemic. The funny part is there are people out there who they're training right now and they love cardio and they love sweating and they love maybe CrossFit and they go do systemic and it's their bread and butter. They love it. The funny part is if you come and you coach with me or you join my group and you're 1 or 2 mesocycles into changing your mentality towards a progressive overload, a hypertrophy, a resting long enough to have a good performance in your next set sort of mentality, you start to get just so excited about those micro progressions that it's funny because like even the kinds of people that when I met them, I'm thinking of a couple of my one-on-one clients, when I met them, they were that person. And when I give them systemic, I'm like, yeah, they're going to love it. They're like, and it's going to be right back to their old days. And they hate it. And they're like, well, I'm so in tune now to not doing this and not sweating as much and not, having cardio be the limiting factor. And so that's been kind of cool to see just from like, I like kind of see, maybe it's my own bias, me liking the fact that they like hypertrophy, but just somebody getting to a point where they realize that might not be that being sweating and having your heart rate super high and all that stuff might not be the be all end all of fitness, that there might be more to it is always cool to see. When I'm programming for the group, we have not done metabolic yet, but what's spinning around in my mind is what you did or have said that you've tried or experienced is a really good appeal to the fact that they are going to enjoy that more than doing either alone, and just getting them to do it and enjoy it if you were going to argue that there was a downside physiologically, which I don't even know you could, but if you could, let's say there was, you're trading that away for like, this is going to be more fun than just doing 8 IRMs right. or 8 whole body circuits. The only thing that I've seen is like dipping my toe into a stimuli with the group before I give them something full blast. And so what I've done is like, I wanted to teach somebody like myo reps or partials or IRM or descending rep work. And so like maybe the mesocycle before I want to do that as a stimulus as a whole, I give one exercise in there somewhere, because let's say somebody's never seen, maybe somebody's not ready for like a 60-60 superset, which is not a super complex thing. It's like I'm doing a lat pull down, 60 seconds, then I'm doing a walking lunge, 60 seconds, and alternating between those two. Maybe somebody that's something new for them. If they have that's new for them, and the IRM stuff that's new for them, I just see people kind of like, if there's too many new things at once. Now, luckily the 60-60 superset, the circuit style training is, that's going to compute better. And so I don't think in your context, you're throwing too much at them at all. But like, it's tricky. I'm a little newer to this than you. You might have a better pulse of like what your group is capable of, or like what they're emotionally and mentally ripe and ready for. But I'm considering my plan probably will be in my next mesocycle, because that'll be like 5 hypertrophy mesocycles in a row. Not that that's too many, and we can talk about how often we want to do metabolic phases and stuff, but I might drip one of these tactics into a hypertrophy cycle and be like, hey, we're going to just do an IRM leg extension this mesocycle, just so you have an opportunity to fuck this up and have it be very low consequence, because it's only one thing. If you don't understand IRM and we're doing 20 of them, then this is not good. And so I might drip that in. This mesocycle, I broke that rule and we just jumped into descending rep work. We're not doing it a lot, but we're doing like 5 exercises with a descending rep scheme before ever having seen that. And so I'm living that experience of like whether or not this will work. But I've always had a better experience just saying, hey, we're going to do this one exercise with descending rep, because in the future, I want you to know what to do when this comes up. With the myo reps, that was so helpful. We did one myo rep, maybe behind the back lateral raise or like a, hammer curl or something. And so everyone got all their questions out and all their confusion out when it was only one exercise. And so when we did a slightly more metabolic, slightly more probably oxidative style, which had a bit more myo rep, partial rep, stuff like deeper into fatigue stuff. Like people knew what it was, or at least more percentage of people knew what it was. So that's a super long answer, but I'm having program. I envy you that you guys are doing a metabolic cycle. My group knows that that's something I've expressed that we will do. I will push them. I will explore new stuff, because even if that's not the best route to please the most people and make the most money, it's something I know is probably best for them to grow intellectually, become more mature lifters. It's also something I'm interested in. So it's a selfish pursuit of like, I'll be more engaged with this whole thing if we're kind of pushing ourselves to grow a little bit. So that's kind of my stance on that.
Yeah, the metabolic cycle thing is definitely, I agree with you that it's not going to take away significantly from the benefit to not split those two up. And when you do look at that enjoyment factor of like, hey, today we're doing 3 full body circuits, or we're doing like 6 sets of 6x8, like literally you just want to be done by the time you're on the third one. So of course, in my personal program, which we're also doing a metabolic phase, I'm doing it the proper way. And so I'm only doing full body circuits for 2 weeks, and then I'm doing a mix of IRM with the duration. So some higher rep sets and some same muscle group supersets. I actually prefer same muscle group supersets over duration sets. So like instead of having to do 15 to 20 reps of one movement, you do 8 of one supersetted with 8 of another for the same muscle group. Much bigger fan of that. And I think that most people are going to be more mentally engaged in a setup like that versus a duration method. But one thing I did want to touch on real quick regarding the group programming is have you touched partials at all? Did you mention that, or am I making that up?
No, we did a banded dumbbell press. So banded around the back, which I made sure to experiment with myself. Because it doesn't, when you band something around the back, it doesn't give you a lot of lateral tension. So it's not actually pulling your arms apart a ton. That's what it looks like if you just watch somebody do it. But I did it, and I actually found the top position to be quite difficult. And whether that's from a serratus, like pushing my protraction, like pushing my scap forward or something, I felt the top position to be notably more difficult. Like actually it was doing something. And so we did a banded DB press into a lengthened paused partial DB press on a flat bench, which was, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but it worked out really great. I thought people did really well with it. So for me, this was my one partial rep introduction to introduce something I know Bryan has either coined or feels very strong about, is like pushing the stimulus and understanding that like I wanted to communicate them. If we're going to do partial in the future, like let's do this now and let's figure out this like, what is a way that I can chew up this, how do I progress on partials question of, well, if you can progress on exercise A, the banded press, do it. And if you can't, progress on the partial, because you can always add another partial. And if we prioritize it that way, then we can care a little bit less if those partials become more partial over time, as long as it's something added. And so I think it worked out really well. And yeah, that idea of trying to communicate, hey, if you can't progress on A, let's progress on B, because you can kind of always do another partial. Obviously, that's not true. If you've done partials, at some point
you're just not moving. You're just paused.
You can always try and do another partial.
No, so that's really interesting. I'm glad. I like that you chose just one movement to like experiment with that on, because what I've kind of struggled with in programming on my side is I've only really implemented it on back movements for like the group program, because those are movements that I know no matter what piece of equipment you have, it's short overloaded. So I really struggle with programming partials, and it's probably not even something I'm going to do, even when it comes to something like, okay, the option is, cable crossover or banded crossover. Well, there's bound to be people that are like, well, I don't have bands or cables, so I'm going to do a dumbbell fly. And I'm like, ooh, well, now the whole rep scheme needs to change because nobody's doing a partial on a dumbbell fly type thing, So I find that same experience happens across many movements where I'm programming it as a short overload movement, like, hey, leg extensions or banded leg extensions. And they're like, I'm going to do sissy squats. And I'm like, yeah, let's not do partials there, So that's something I've really struggled with. And so just so far in our program, like it's been primarily like back movements where there's been anything like that. And I just, I can't really foresee a situation in which I'm probably going to progress it much beyond that.
The utilization of the partials with a lengthened pause on a lengthened movement was solely because that is, if you look at that is like the most metabolic damage or most mechanical damage you could be doing via like a home gym for pecs, let's say, or one of them. The reason being is we don't have a lot of pec movements. And so this was like, we're going to blast our pecs with this one movement, mostly because it's a primarily female oriented group. We have like a maybe 80-20 split. And so if dudes message me on the side and they're like, hey, what would you do? I'm like, well, we're going to blast our pectus meso. So like, just see how you do with that, because the soreness I would prefer a shortened overload movement for the addition of partials, but this was like we're only going to do one thing of pecs, and so it's got to be lengthened, and it might even be worse than that. So,
no, it's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, you just tried it on one movement, and then by adding the band, you also made it more short overloaded. So no, I don't think that was all good. I wasn't trying to say that you did anything wrong. It was more just like, this is something I struggle with.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. No, I see it. It's no problem. Have you tried a reverse drop set in the group? Yeah, right.
I have in the evolved group. I haven't done it yet. So the way my process works is it goes me, evolved, then Paragon. So right now it's in the evolved stage, and then we'll see if reverse drop set becomes a thing on Paragon at some point.
Yeah. I train one person from like one of my good friends who became a good friend when I was back at that first gym. I still train her on Zoom twice a week. You can't even make this up. It's totally not something I ever want to do, but it's just a very, very close friend. And that's what I do with her. Total experimental. It's totally like guinea pig. We're doing like reverse drop set, iliac pull downs, and a lot of like that banded work I try on her first. And so that's like, you need some form of like guinea pig
absolutely.
for that.
Yeah. It makes you just better at what you do. Straker, I haven't heard from you in a while.
I was just going to add that I just love being the guinea pig myself. Right. I mean, I will see, because there's a lot of times where something looks great on paper and then you run it and you're like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work at all. So I personally just love doing that myself. But yeah, I mean, just everything you guys said. The one thing I did want to add that I think could be a very smooth introduction to the partials is on lateral delt type stuff. That is a great movement. It's really, really hard to kind of dick that one up. I think Jordan might be sitting down.
Yeah, so...
Oh, no.
No, we're good.
Jordan, how has standing been for the last hour and a half?
It's been good. I was thinking about switching it up, but then I just had like a moment where it hit something and it didn't go down, so I'm just we're gonna deal with it later. No worries.
Nice. I think that's all we got for him, right, Straker?
Yeah.
You want to tell everybody where to find you?
Yeah, Jordan, before we hop off, please, where can all the listeners find more of you? Where can they find both of your group training programs? And then you can let us know whether you are booked or not with personal or one-on-one clients, and where they may be able to find a wait list if that is the case.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram mostly. I just repurpose content for TikTok, so don't expect an answer there at all. I'm on Instagram for sure. Come hang out, send a DM. My website is jordanlipsfitness.com if you want to look for everything. I have a podcast titled Where Optimal Meets Practical, which does a very similar job to what you guys do. I don't have cool co-hosts though, so it's not as cool, let's say. But yeah, similar topics and stuff. And Bryan, both of you guys have been on the podcast, so if you haven't listened to those, come check those out. I have links to the group programming in my bio. There's also a podcast that explains what the group program is about. And so if that's your question, there's a link to that as well. And that's about it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. As always, Jordan, thank you for coming, hanging out, having a very in-depth quality conversation with Bryan and I. And I'm sure we will do this again at some point in the future. So for all the listeners out there, guys, Bryan and I will talk to you next week.